It's been over 3 years now since my wife and I started playing games together, and now that 2024 is over, I can confidently look back at this year as one of my favorite years in gaming since I was a kid.
Unlike my husband, who started collecting Wampa fruit at age 5, I have been slowly exposed to the deeper narratives, relatable characters, and the immersive worlds that gaming has to offer. But that still didn't prepare me for what 2024 had in store.
Whether it's a new multiplayer trend or a new single-player experience, we play every single game together.
And today, we are ranking every new gaming experience we had in 2024, from the games we enjoyed the least to the games we enjoyed the most.
But out of the 19 different games we experienced together this year, not every one of them were 2024 releases.
And since he's been gaming for so long, some of these games he's played before. But every single game on this list is one that we experienced together for the very first time.
But every year is not without some disappointment.
Counting the terrible multiplayer-only game, a spin-off, and a prologue of this year's release, Alone in the Dark 2024 is the 9th game in the Alone in the Dark franchise.
But this iteration is a reimagining of the classic survival horror game set in the 1920s. Players control Edward Carnby and Emily Hartwood as they explore the eerie Derceto Manor, uncovering supernatural threats and dark secrets while searching for Emily's missing uncle. What initially drew my attention to this was David Harbour and Jodie Comer's involvement, who voice Edward and Emily respectfully.
But past their performances and the occasional bizarre encounter, the game didn't really keep our attention. The story felt a bit too familiar, and not in a good way, which really made some of the technical difficulties stand out.
But unfortunately, this wasn't the only title that disappointed us this year.
Banisher's Ghost of New Eden is an action RPG by Don't Nod, the same group who brought us Life is Strange and Vampire, Banishers being more like the latter. It's set in 17th century North America and follows ghost hunters Antea and Red, whose mission to protect the living takes a tragic turn when Antea becomes a ghost.
Just by description alone, it honestly sounds like an amazing time, which is what we were hoping for when we bought the game back in March.
But despite the glowing Steam reviews and the unique story, the repetitive gameplay and overall presentation just seem like the same recipe many developers are trying to replicate since God of War's success back in 2018.
But I want to make it clear that this game is far from bad, so that's what led us walking away from it feeling a bit more disappointed than anything. Maybe we just tried it out at the wrong time. Either way, I could still see us returning to it in the future.
Speaking of time, there were 2 games that we spent a lot of time with at the beginning of this year.
Helldivers 2 and Palworld were 2 games that stormed the gaming community during a time of the year when we usually experience a drought in new quality games.
Both of these games introduced me to genres that I had never played before: third-person shooters and survival crafting.
And even though we spent hours spreading managed democracy and shooting Pokemon, we haven't returned to either of them since our initial weekend binge, which is why they're so low on this list. Again, not bad games, but there are more we enjoyed. A lot more.
But the third person isn't the only perspective we spent hours in.
Most of my teenage years were spent earning kill streaks, running riots, and this. 10 years later, I still find time to do the same.
Trying out new random first-person shooters that we can mindlessly play together has become a guilty pleasure of ours, and both RoboQuest and Combat Master scratched that itch perfectly this year.
RoboQuest is a roguelite FPS where you control a robot to shoot your way through procedurally generated environments, while Combat Master is a free-to-play FPS that's more like classic Modern Warfare 2, but with speedy parkour-like movement.
Both had such smooth and fast gameplay that made me feel like I was actually good at first-person shooters.
To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the roguish genre, and those single-player games are what we spend most of our time with. Considering Combat Master is free and RoboQuest can be snagged on Game Pass still, I find myself still returning to both of these games.
And though both of these first-person shooters were newer, I was also introduced to one of gaming's most iconic titles this year.
I was actually surprised when Left 4 Dead 2 reminded me how difficult it was. You have to consistently work together with the 3 other survivors to escape the various creepy environments in the Deep South.
Which ended up being why we had so much fun with it. I can see why this game is so timeless. I couldn't believe I had gone so long without knowing who Valve is and that their games even existed. But the next game was a sequel to a cult classic series that was new to both of us.
The Stalker games are a series that I've always kept an eye on, but in the past, I was just too afraid to commit to investing my time into any other post-apocalyptic RPG. However, when I heard that Stalker 2 was not only announced as a real title, it was actually going to come out, but it was also coming to Game Pass, so I figured there's no reason not to check it out.
Though we had a rocky start when we first booted up Stalker 2, something happened that neither of us expected.
The heck?
Well, there's that, but also the level of detail and engagement that we are seeing in Stalker 2 so far reminded me of the good old days roaming the Mojave Wasteland in Fallout New Vegas.
What?
Well, this is cool. Which, trust me, I know that's a huge statement, but bear with me for a sec.
Even though we haven't finished it yet, we can already tell the journey through the fictional Chernobyl setting will be a special one.
And though Stalker 2 surprised me, it didn't surprise me as much as Marvel Rivals.
Despite the fact that I know more about Zendaya and Tom Holland's relationship than I do about the Marvel Universe, we really had a great time playing this game together.
And with the hero shooter genre seeing some rough times this year, it was so crazy to see one be as simply addictive as Marvel Rivals is. With every character unlocked on day one and zero role lock, this is a game that hero shooters should look at as a base standard.
If you've ever popped into our stream, you know that we are cat people. So my husband definitely knew what he was doing when he showed me Monster Hunter World this year.
Like many of you probably, World is a game that I have previously sunk countless hours into, and seeing as Madeline honed her skills in a certain special game that will be featured later in this list, I figured it was time to join the hunt together.
Watching these little guys whip up the best looking meals I have ever seen in a video game, period, never gets old. And even though introducing me to a game that's gameplay loop is literally fashion grinding was probably not good for my productivity, it was insane to see how many hours could be lost carving up monsters for a pair of pants.
Milk inside a bag of milk, inside a bag of milk, inside a bag of milk, is a game that's hard to explain on the surface. You play as a character's inner thoughts while they go to a local market to buy a bag of milk in a world that for some reason reminds me of an extremely screwed up version of Rock Bottom in that one episode of SpongeBob. Also, there's this.
The game really makes you feel how mentally tormenting it can be for some people to do something as simple as buying milk in a way that I still can't really explain after playing it. Calling it a psychological horror game kind of feels like an understatement.
If I were to describe it in my own words, it's kind of like when you accidentally discover that part of YouTube. And like a lot of games later on this list, it's one that makes you think about the message it's trying to relay long after you played it, despite and maybe even because of how disturbing the imagery can be. At a 15-minute runtime and only 74 cents on Steam, there is absolutely zero reason why you should miss out on this game.
2024 has been the most heartbreaking and triumphant year for Dragon Ball fans. And even though I've only recently gone through the anime, I was completely amazed by Dragon Ball Sparking Zero.
In terms of presentation, Sparking Zero was well worth the wait, coming from someone who grew up with the Budokai series. And even though the only map option for couch co-op is Hyperbolic Time Chamber, for some reason, an episode battle did feel a little lacking. It's everything a Dragon Ball fan could want in a fighting game. I mean, look at this.
And for someone with literally no experience in fighting games, the auto options give me an actual chance when we play against each other. So I don't really have to actually get good.
Because of this game, I can actually say that I love fighting with my wife. But if you're familiar with our channel, you know that someone here is not much of a fighter and more of a lover. I'm talking romance options in video games.
So in our newfound liking for visual novels and traumatic experiences, we found ourselves making our way through Doki Doki Literature Club for the very first time.
Don't let this cutesy facade fool you. There's something here that will change the way you look at dating sims and anime gals alike.
Playing as a high school guy that finds himself in the middle of an all-girl after-school literature club, you wouldn't expect to be traumatized halfway through the game.
But despite the incredibly dark turn this game does take, you really start to see how relatable each of the characters are as you get to know them.
For those of you who have played Doki Doki before, you know exactly what we were talking about. But if you haven't, now is your chance to go in blind and find out what you've been missing out on since 2017.
And strange enough, this isn't the only game on this list that came out in 2017.
Night in the Woods was a first for both of us. After seeing this game come up on countless lists of people's most loved games, we knew we had to give it a try. And despite how simple what you're seeing may look, this indie game completely blew us away.
Without giving too much away, you play as a cat named May, who has just dropped out of college and returned home to figure out what the hell to do next. And for a game that takes place in a community with some pretty crazy lore and anthropomorphic residents, this game ended up being the most relatable out of any of the games we experienced this year.
Finding a severed arm, raising a family of rats, and getting the old band from high school back together were just a few of the things we did in our time at Possum Spring. And not only that, but the writing actually made me laugh out loud, something that most movies can't accomplish these days.
But the humor stops where What Remains of Edith Finch begins.
I'm sure my mom was just trying to protect me. Now that there's only one of us left, I thought it
A game that takes place in a house that reminds me a lot of the Burrow from Harry Potter. You play as a character searching for answers about her family, whose members have each met a strange end to their lives.
This was a game we finished in one sitting, and within the game's 2-hour runtime, when we weren't uncovering the fate of the Finch family, we were completely engrossed by yet another 2017 banger and its immersive setting and visual storytelling.
If I had just a few words to describe what remains of Edith Finch, they would be tragic but hopeful.
And as we found our way through this bizarre but oddly charming house, we found that it wasn't just discovering what fate was met by the family members, but also the riddle-like quality to every story told that engaged us so well. But considering what's next, it's probably best to abandon all hope here.
If you are a fan of surreal environments, a thought-provoking story, and relatable characters that are nicely wrapped up in an intense 2.5-hour psychological horror experience, then you will not play a better game than Mouthwashing this year.
As people that aren't immediately drawn to horror games, Mouthwashing gave us a narrative experience that I feel is best explored through the horror genre. Like every game yet to be named on this list, Mouthwashing makes my list of the best games I have ever played. Although decoding the symbolism behind why this doomed crew of 5 is delivering thousands of cases of mouthwash in the far reaches of space may not be something that is possible while experiencing the game's fast-paced and obscure storytelling, this game gives you more than enough time to think it over days after you have finished it.
The last 3 entries were the absolute hardest to rank, as each of them provided us with a deeply meaningful experience in 3 very different ways. And in our third spot of the top 3 is
not Shadow of the Erdtree, but actually base Elden Ring.
2024 was the year that I became Elden Lord and introduced the Age of Fracture to the lands between. This was a very special accomplishment for me, having little experience in gaming and even less in open world RPGs.
And being able to accomplish something like this side by side the entire time ended up being one of the most memorable gaming experiences I have ever had in my entire life. One that I'm already nostalgic for even before the year has ended.
Hunting every NPC side quest, collecting every Steam achievement we could without breaking our pride. Fashion Souls, it has almost everything I could want in a video game.
And in one of our extremely long play sessions of Elden Ring together, something happened that hasn't happened to me since 2010 when I was working my way through Mass Effect 2. We played so long that we started to see the sunrise.
And even though we both have Shadow of the Erdtree, we are just waiting for the right time to once again journey back into the lands between and sink as much time in as we can to figure out what the hell is going on in the realm of Shadow and finally see what all this hype is about.
And of course, now that there's a new Elden Ring game coming out, we better get a move on. So the second best game we played this year is actually 3 games. Sorry, our list, our rules. And I've kind of hinted at what's coming up next. The Mass Effect trilogy is one of my favorite gaming experiences that I have ever had, so to finally set time aside to take on the Reapers as Commander Shepard alongside her crew once again was an absolute treat. But to be able to share this experience with someone who knew absolutely nothing about Mass Effect and what BioWare has accomplished in the 7th generation of gaming was on a completely different level.
I have never experienced a game trilogy that so perfectly makes you feel as though every little decision impacts your individualized experience throughout all 3 games. The worlds and the characters you encounter have a way of making you feel as though it all exists out there, somewhere, long after you save all organic life.
Loading up the star map and deciding which new planet to be shipped off to by the nearest mass relay still gives me a dopamine rush to this day. It was also the very first time a video game contained characters that I actually cared about, and continues to do so. But I never knew the void that this incredible space opera left would be filled by this.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was and is the best game that we have and will play this year.
And if for some reason you have not experienced Final Fantasy VII Rebirth yet, and you have the means to, your permission to do so has been granted. 2024 was our initiation year into the world of Final Fantasy. And after filling our summer with Final Fantasy VII Remake, we immediately made our move to Rebirth.
Rebirth provided the most rewarding open world I can imagine a game having. The elaborate regions were engaging to explore, and the side quests were so fulfilling to complete. And of course, we had romancing options. But the game did a remarkable job at making every relationship special throughout your entire journey.
Not only did Rebirth show what can and should be accomplished by a sequel, Square set an incredible new standard for remakes in general. And the story we created between Cloud and Aerith is one that I am so glad we were able to share with others along the way.
The creativity that is on display around every corner is so inspiring, and if you have ever played a game that has inspired you, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Which, if you've made it to this point of the video, why not share a game that inspired you with everyone in the comments below?
You probably noticed that we refer to games as experiences quite a bit throughout the video, and that is exactly what our channel is about.
We want to share our gaming experiences with everyone, so you can be inspired to do the same.
So don't be afraid to join us live every Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday at 11 p.m. Central Time, where just like with Rebirth, we will be creating new gaming experiences and making new friends along the way.